Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Finn's Faithful podcast. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us on this Monday night. Of course, we're live always with you guys on X and on YouTube. Make sure you guys come over to YouTube, hit that little thumbs up icon, little bell. I know it's annoying for us to keep asking, but it really helps support the channel. We're about what less than 2 weeks away from June, where there should be some activity. I expect the Jalen Ramsey trade pretty soon after June 1st. Probably as soon as the clock strikes June 1. Plus, we'll probably see a couple acquisitions in the defensive back room, at least, whether it be a trade or whether it be a free agency. But before we get there, I kind of want to go the offseason in a whole, kind of get a state of where the Dolphins are today. We'll go through with my guest, Coach Eric Smith. You catch him on 5 Reasons Sports Network with Scouting the Finns. They do great work over there. Eric, thanks for joining me this evening. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Really appreciate you having me on here. I know we've talked about this for
For
a
a
bit,
while.
and when you reached out to finally do it and set it up, I've been looking forward to
All
this.
right, good, man. Let's start off here. Give the people know your coaching background. You're specifically the offensive line. I know that's a position that's a topic around here, so I'm sure everybody wants your opinion on that. Give a little bit of the people know your coaching background.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a high school football coach here in Pennsylvania. I have been coaching basically since I got out of high school, over 20 years in coaching now. Um, been with the current high school for this will be my 6th season, and this will be my 3rd season as a varsity offensive line coach with the school. Throughout my coaching, career, whatever you want to call it, I've been offensive line, been offensive coordinator, even did head coach, and always just come back to the offensive line. That's where I love to be. Love working with my guys there.
Awesome, man. All right, so we'll get to the offensive line. We'll get to the individual moves, but I guess I want to start here. When the clock struck zero against the Jets in the last game of the season, when you thought your expectation, what the picture was going to look like this offseason, before we get to the now, what kind of was your vision? What did you expect them to do this offseason? Without kind of erasing what's actually happened. I know that's
Yeah,
hard.
I mean, no, yeah, I get it. And I mean, going back to that time, like it was very uncertain what the team was going to do, right? I mean, there was lots of talk about not bringing Greer back, not bringing either of them back and blowing it up. Obviously, the result was that they did decide to bring both of them back. It was kind of a little bit of a surprise that we haven't seen the big free agents signing like we have in the past, kind of going a different path in that way. A little surprising, but at the same time, not so much, because if we go back to when, going all the way back to when Steve Ross introduced Chris Greer, he talked about then trying to be able to build a product that was a consistent winner, and obviously we haven't seen that at this point. I think they kind of missed the win now opportunity, trying to follow the Rams blueprint of bringing in those high price free agents, sending draft picks away to bring back veterans. That part obviously didn't work out the way that everyone had hoped. But at the same time, I get why they didn't just completely blow it up, and that we're now trying to transition into the next phase where we try to build through the draft and try to be a little more, you know, fiscally responsible.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, what has surprised you? You said, you know, kind of what is the most surprising thing that hasn't happened this offseason? And what is the most surprising thing that has happened for as far as this offseason so far?
Most surprising thing that
Based
hasn't
on your
happened.
expectation, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I was surprised there wasn't some sort of, big addition in the secondary. You kind of knew going into the offseason that, 3 of the 4 weren't gonna be back almost certainly. And then, as we moved into the offseason, obviously looks to be, 4 out of 4 new
Yeah.
starters. I kind of expected them to maybe go out and spend a little more money in the secondary, specifically at safety. I mean, that's a position that you can typically spend a little more and get, a little more bang for your buck. So I would say that I was surprised that they did not do that. And kind of the same with the Y tight end position as well. And I kind of get that one too, because I do think that the staff really likes Julian Hill. I thought maybe they would, you know, go after somebody a little better than Pharaoh Brown that would, maybe keep the seat warm for him and try to see if he could develop. But it seems like they are, I don't see Pharaoh Brown beating out Julian Hill. Unless Julian Hill really struggles again like he did early last season. Uh, so I think that we're going to see Hill thrown into the fire a little bit again like he did last year. Hopefully he reacts early in the season better than the way last year started.
Yeah, I agree. This was kind of I agree with you in that point. I thought I went into the offseason, Eric, thinking, what does a desperate Chris Greer look like, right? Like I wasn't sure what kind of offseason this was going to – I thought it would be a little bit different for Greer because I thought, man, the excuses are up. There's at a certain point where I know Stephen Ross likes the camaraderie. I know he likes him in that building. Again, I don't think Greer's going to leave. I think he's just going to be repositioned eventually. That's just my opinion. But, like, I think he even knew, like, heck, I'm getting criticized left and right. Let me kind of do it my way. And I wanted to see how he acted. And he acted in a way, a guy who's not afraid to lose his job. He kind of – it was a kind of a – somebody said, hey, we got to stop the credit card debt. We got to stop pushing it down. We got to kind of slow down. No more money going out. And so that surprised me. I agree with you on that. But, he's a guy, Eric, that is acting like his job is not, kind of screwing McDaniel in a little bit of a way, right? Like, because Mike's sitting there like, well, yeah, my job's probably in jeopardy. Like, we're not adding this. So I agree with you. It was sort of whether they want to win or not, it was a soft rebuild, right? Or a reset, kind of is how you want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they ever really saw it that way. I think that they see this, and like you said, they're not acting as if the seat is hot, but I think that they are, continuing the plan that they originally had. I think they had that original plan of, you're going out and getting the Tyreek Hills, the Bradley Chubbs, the Jalen Ramseys, and you're trying to get that quick run deep in the playoffs. That obviously didn't work out, but I think that this part of it has always been the plan that, you can't, that's not sustainable, right? You're trying to, get a little quick goodwill from the fans, which obviously hasn't worked out. But, clearly Stephen Ross still sees it because you saw even in last year's draft, like a lot of people felt like the Dolphins front office was going to be on the hot seat a little bit in last year's draft. And they come out and those first two picks are guys that,
this year
didn't necessarily, you didn't expect them to be as significant of contributors as they ended up being. So I think that kind of carried over from last season that, it's just the continued plan. I think we're moving into the next phase of it. And even though, fans felt like Greer should be on the hot seat, I think that, somehow Greer has convinced Ross, enough, probably a lot of it going back to the Tua health stuff, showing Ross that, overall the vision I feel is still working, but just like last season went off the hinges with the Tua injury, everything in the future kind of hinges on the same thing as well.
Right. Yeah. So I guess you're saying, but they didn't have obviously the success they wanted to. I think they wanted to kind of be like the Panthers, right? We're kind of got to let's win a championship or get deep in the playoffs, and we got to kind of reset. Problem is when you don't win a playoff game and you come off a 9-8 season, it looks really bad. To do this. And here's the other problem. Eric, I love doing these shows because I have a plan of how we're going to start talking. Then I go, we're just two guys talking and I'm going in a different direction. And I like this,
of course,
because this topic is my problem with the plan is they only accumulated 2 drafts of 2 big picks, 20 and 21, and they stopped, right? They, okay, we messed up on Flores. We got to rehabilitate our quarterback psyche. That's great, and it worked. And to prove whether you like him or not healthy, he's a top 10, 12 quarterback in my opinion. And look, do I want to see him kill at the end of the season and have those kill games? Absolutely. But when healthy, Tua, it's going to be very hard to find a better quarterback than Tua. Besides the point, I thought they should have kept going with that plan, Eric. Keep building the draft picks. And I said this, and I got pushback on. I said, I think where this went wrong was the Tyreek Hill trade. Because I think, look, it's easy. Me and you can trade a bunch of draft picks and spend a lot of money and acquire players. Oh, you want Tyreek Hill? Give me your whole draft. We'll do it. Okay, good. It's easy to do. So I think to me, I want to kind of get one of your thoughts on that. Do you think they should have kept going with the draft picks, keep adding, even though I don't think they capitalized in 20 and 21, maximized? I think the Dolphins, and this is where Chris Greer's biggest issue. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but in the draft he's not a bad GM. He's just not great. He's just in the middle, and they don't maximize their value spots. When you have 5 first rounders in 2 years and 4 seconds, they didn't get enough out of that, right? They didn't get it. There's not a guy who I say is even close to being considered like you would think, oh, this guy down the road could be a gold jacket player. Don't see any of those. How many all pros are on there, right? They're good players, but sometimes it's not the players you pick, it's the players you don't. Kind of your thoughts on that philosophy change, that plan change from get the picks to, F them picks.
Yeah, no, so I agree, but at the same time, part of the issue there was the change in coaching staff, right?
True.
Had they continued with Flores and had that not become a complete disaster that was untenable and somebody had to go, I think that you probably would have continued down that path and you're building with Brian Flores guys. But when that change clearly had to happen and you're going to McDaniel, every time that you change a coach, you're going to have that churn of the roster and the churn of the coaches. And if you go back, I think it's been back to the Adam Gase days till, it's been the same offensive and defensive coordinators returning to the team from one year to the next. Every year, at least one of them is changing, which means that you're churning players on both sides of the roster. So I think that, being in the middle of whatever we're calling this, I think is one of the biggest issues, right? And now, we're seeing a little bit of it, that you can see the vision of what these coaches are trying to do. You can see the vision, somewhat of what Mike McDaniel's trying to do on offense. And that's how you see a guy like Malik Washington be a 5th round pick and, be an okay contributor as a rookie, and somebody that, is looking to increase that contribution as a sophomore. So I think that is the biggest thing as far as that, the change in philosophy is the change in coaches. And, hopefully we can see this coaching staff continue and build on the vision that we're working on now.
Yeah. So I guess that's also part of my problem with Greer is, like, where's the conviction? Like the chain of command, it's always he defers. Like, and I think this draft truly, I think, was the Chris Greer draft, right? I kind of believe that, because even down to the running back was, they would have took Bashal Tutin if it was something like McDaniel, right? So like I do think this was like he was like, what? My wife's getting criticized at Publix. I'm getting tired of it. Let me at least do it my way here before I get promoted but demoted, right? Because I do think, I don't know if you agree with that, there'll be a reshuffling eventually with Greer, because if they don't start winning playoff games, it's going to be very hard to keep him in kind of in that personnel general manager role, even though they love him in that building. But yeah, I agree with you. And I think my point is you said plan. I'm not sure what was the plan, right? Do you have a clear plan from, you just think it was as simple as the coaching change, but shouldn't the GM kind of overtake that and stick with the original plan for the franchise, not just, okay, we don't need offensive linemen, we just need Tua needs speed guys, right? He's got to be more responsible and say, hey, Mike, all right, I got you, but I think this is the best way to do it. Like at some point, and that's part of the problem here, is the lack of conviction and leadership in the front office, and it goes all the way down from the top to the bottom. That's just my opinion, but I understand your point. It's well taken. I agree with you that the coaching change probably led to, let's go get, Tyreek Hill available, F them picks, let's kind of go do it, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, Greer has been known as a coach pleaser type GM, and that's very much a delicate balance, because you don't want to just pile up a bunch of players and give it to a coach and say, hey, you got to make this
True.
work. You got to let the coach have some input, but yeah, the GM, is responsible for the product that gets put on the field in the end. And I kind of get, I forget what the book's called, the there was a book that was written by Mike Silver, I think it was.
Oh, I know what you're
Why
talking
is
about. Yeah,
everything?
yeah,
The
yeah,
Why is everything.
yeah.
Great book, and talks about the Shanahan tree, and it gets into McDaniel. And one of the things in there is kind of what we're talking about here was that when McDaniel got here, that everybody was talking about investing in the offensive line, and McDaniel was more like we need to get guys that can separate. And while it hasn't worked out, right? We keep saying that,
Yeah.
that I think that like
It hasn't
I
been a
still
disaster. It hasn't been a disaster. Well, let's
yeah.
be fair,
I,
right?
yeah, I mean, I still get McDaniel's vision with that. Like even last year, like they have not invested big free agent dollars in the offensive line. Had Austin Jackson stayed healthy, had Teron Armstead stayed healthy, like the blueprint is working. Is just finding guys that can stay on the field with that. But I do think that, like you said, that Greer has finally gotten to that point that we know that Mike McDaniel does not put a high value on guards in an offense, right? And this year it seems like they went out and got a good free agent guard in James Daniels, and then traded up to get another guard. And that felt a lot more like a Chris Greer move than a Mike McDaniel move.
Yeah, Eric, I didn't know. I always said I don't know what a Chris Greer draft looks like. You know what I mean? I didn't know. Finally, I think I saw one, and I had that. I came away. Everybody was like, "Oh, that pre-draft press conference was strange," and yeah, it was. But I came away with that impression, like, okay, he admitted he deferred too much. Like he was setting the stage, like we're going meat and potatoes here. This is kind of like where he came from, the New England. Build the way they're supposed to. But I wish they would have done early on inside out, and it kind of it might be a little bit too late for him, but I like that they did that. But all right, so we talked about McDaniel. I was going to talk about this towards the end, but I think it's a good time now. And you talked about the changes they made. I want to talk about the offense last season because it was, even with, I mean, obviously Tua's injured, but even with Tua, it wasn't what we saw, the big plays. Here's how I looked at it. Obviously everybody talks about the shell, the cover two, which has been around forever. You as a coach know that. How do you break that off? Run the football, right? But I was watching film, there was literally, Eric, and I'm sure 4 or 5 man boxes, and we were getting -1 yards. So why in the heck the linebackers are dropping back in coverage? You're not going to get many chances even with Tyreek and Waddle. And that can't happen with 30, 50 something $million on the outside in total. That can't happen. So they develop. I always said the fastball's being caught up, right? The 98, they've timed it, right? That was the 2023 season. That lasted about 8 or 9 games. They got to develop a changeup. Their changeup kind of was, all right, Tua, take everything underneath, whatever there, Jonu, the running backs, 8-chain, whatever. Whatever's underneath, take it. So now I feel like we got to kind of combine everything. We got to now develop also a slider, which is a power running game, some sort of running game. I want to see, and this is what I want to talk to you about. I want to see a little more inside zone this year. If that's possible to transition, we'll talk about that. But kind of develop that slider now, and then buckle the knees, go back to 98, and because you still got to make the big plays. I think that's what we got to see this offseason. And I am encouraged by the move of Savayanai. Is that how you do? We officially have his last name? Is it? His explanation, Eric, was it made me. I was even more confused.
See, his explanation is what helped me the whole Hawaii
Really?
thing, right?
So what do you got? What do you
Anaya,
Savvy Anaya,
Anaya.
right? Savvy Anaya and James Daniels, and even the drafting of Ollie Gordon. We'll talk about the draft picks. I would like to see a little bit. He's not going to go totally from the wide stretch outside zone. That's who he is, and speed is who Mike McDaniel is. But like mixing it up now, let's have the couple off-speed pitches, but let's not forget about the fastball because that's how you build your team. You and Tua on play action in a running game, you make a mistake in the defense. Tua's like a surgeon. He can pick you apart. Is that what you kind of want to see in the offense evolution? What do you think needs to happen for them to kind of now they got countered, now recounter?
Yeah, so to kind of revisit your point of those light boxes being able to stop the run game, kind of relates back to, a study that I had. As you know, I grade every play,
Yeah.
every lineman, every play. So I have a pretty good database of plays. And this past offseason, I went back, well, this current offseason, and tried to find out how often our offensive line was shuffling. And if you go all the way back to 2023, beginning of 2023, we have had one time over the last 2 seasons where we went more than 120 snaps with the same 5 offensive linemen, and that's less than 2 full games. In that one stretch that we went over 120 was that 5-week stretch in 2024 when we were averaging over 150 yards a game on the ground. Right. So how do you improve that? I think that the main focus there has got to be a way to find continuity on the offensive line. And I feel like they've done a good job in doing that. Even though Patrick Paul is not going to be the same player that Teron Armstead is, right? Hopefully we know who our left tackle is for 17 games, right? And same thing across the line. I mean, obviously Austin Jackson,
Big
is
loss.
a
Nobody
risk.
talks. No, that was a big loss last year. Nobody talks enough about that. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, you can't guarantee that's not going to happen again, but I think they've done a good job in setting up this offensive line in a way that, is going to allow them to have more continuity there. I think that, that is the way that you improve, right? You build that chemistry and your running game is going to improve just on that alone. In terms of the inside zone stuff, I don't think that we're going to run more inside zone. I know a lot of people have used the Sean McVay comparison.
Yeah.
The difference there is that McVay kind of branched out from the Shanahan tree before he got that Rams
He
position.
did.
Whereas Mike McDaniel has, been through the Mike Shanahan, all the way back to the Broncos and has been Kyle Shanahan's right-hand man. Outside zone is what he knows. So I'll be interested to see if the ratios change, but I do think that some of these additions are going to help to be more effective when they do run it. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not expecting us to go to 25% outside zone. Maybe we're
Oh no.
20%, right? But that 15-20% that we're running in 2025 is hopefully more effective than it was in 2024.
Yeah, I agree. I just want a little bit. I agree. I think that's his bread and butter. He's not getting it, but implement a little bit more of a power, maybe a package, something to kind of, in this, because that's what gets him in December and January, right? And don't get me wrong, the guard play was bad last year, right? I know you break down on the film as I do, but how many tackles did the running backs break last year? That was also an issue, right? Like, running Devon A chain up the A or B gap 20, 25 times a game is not the answer, right? Like, so I think that's why, the upgrade at running back, like I was hoping for a Najee Harris or something like that, or a proven bigger kind of running back. But, we'll talk about Ollie Gordon in the draft. But I agree with your point. The guard plays improved this year. And it's funny. Let's kind of compare the two offensive lines from last year. No better person to ask than you. And shout out to everybody who's watching. We got over 75 people in here. Make sure you guys come over to YouTube, smash that like and subscribe button. We're with Coach Eric Smith. You see him on 5 Reasons Sports, Sky and the Fins. We're breaking down the Dolphins, the state of the Dolphins, the current state of the Dolphins before they head into June, and kind of the whole offseason. Kind of maybe some things we like they did this offseason and what they haven't improved on. And we'll go with the offensive line. Obviously, I think the guard plays improved, right? We think James Daniels. We'll talk about Savi Anaya, but the left tackle position, because let's go back to last year's draft. I wasn't a fan of that pick. I don't know how you felt about Patrick Paul pick, but it was me. Is he had some of the worst hand technique and hand placement in college? When I remember watching his film, they were so wide outside. It was just, I was like, man, how is this gonna work? He's so long. He looks the part. I see the dream. I see what they see. But then I started watching him this year, and yeah, Myles Garrett gave him trouble. He's going to give anybody trouble. And then I started, he's up and down. It was inconsistent. Wasn't great. But I was like, a guy who has that kind of arm length, and what got me is the 31 reps. And I look at that for a guy with that kind, more than anybody, that kind of an arm length usually doesn't put up over 30 reps. Those are the Jackson Slaters. Those are the barrel-chested inside guys, the 32-inch arm guys. So I just think like he gets away with it because he's so long and it looks awkward. But I was like, he's kind of winning with it. So I'm like, maybe there's hope there. So I got a little more hope on Patrick Paul. What are your thoughts on him and his prospects in the future? What did you see last year?
Yeah, so I mean, I was probably more of a fan of that pick than a lot of others. And one of the things that I've learned over all my years of coaching is that offensive linemen are going to win in a lot of different ways. There's not a one size fits all, right? And when you look at Patrick Pollock, a lot of people saw those wide hands and saw it as a major issue. But in my evaluation, when I look at Teron Armstead, you see a lot of the same thing. It's not the common way to teach it, right? But those guys almost allow the defense to get into their chest, and then they get those big
Yeah.
old claws around them, and if you're basically hugging him.
Yeah, you
And
got to have
Teron
a very
Armstead,
unique skill set to do that, and
right?
they might
Like,
have them. Yeah,
and that's when you look at the size of Paul, like not everybody can do that. Like
yeah,
Austin Jackson does not have the anchor to be able to do that, and he's
no,
tried to do it. It hasn't worked real well for him. But you're rarely going to see Patrick Paul getting bull rushed, right? So it's that initial punch to jolt a defender, the way that a lot of people talk. Patrick Paul doesn't need that, right? Because he can let that defender get into his chest without giving up ground. And then once that defender is in his chest, he's got those go-go gadget arms that,
yeah,
you're not going to be able to spin out of it. You're not going to be able to counter out of it. Like you're basically, just turn into a statue with the way that he can wrap you up. And I think that a player like him, right? You look at his size, his athleticism, right? If that player did not have some techniques that needed to be cleaned up, you
get
weren't getting him in the
you get
40s. That's a top 15
yeah,
pick if you can clean up all of that. So I think that looking forward to next year, even before I knew what was happening with the rest of the offensive line, like I said, the big thing for me is continuity. And as much as I appreciate everything that Teron Armstead has done for this offensive line, I was ready to go ahead and move on from Teron Armstead and start the Patrick Paul era, regardless of what happened, just from that continuity standpoint. What we saw from Patrick Paul as a rookie, I'm not going to sit here and say that, I'm expecting a Pro Bowl or All Pro season out of him, but I also don't expect just a complete dumpster fire by any means. I feel like he's a very, very high floor player that, we're going to get solid play at a minimum based on what we saw in 2023. And, if he really, you know, hones in, which, seems like kid's got very good
yeah.
work ethic, very smart,
Great kid.
has high aspirations, right? So you can't ask for a better person as far as that goes. If he puts it all together, he could really be special.
Yeah, the thing is I think he'll do enough to get by this year. I actually
Mhm.
I'm less worried about it than I was because, like you said, I came away saying, it's very rare. I remember Jake Long's combine. I'm not saying he's Jake Long, but like Jake Long was one of these 6'7" tackles. And I'm looking up. When you see a 6'7" tackle, you don't. I think Jake Long had like 35, 37 reps. I look at that kind of stuff, and I think that's the key there. With he's got such a unique skill set and trait with the arm length. What is his arms like 36 inches? It's
Yeah.
crazy, and to have that kind of strength. Again, I caught that early. I said, you know what? I'm not as down on him as I thought because, dude, he wins that way. It's hard. It's mammoth, and then the strength, the body, the anchor's there. And so I think we'll get by there. And I think there's a lot more upside. So I'm okay there. I'm not. I know people are worried about that position, and I was worried too when we drafted him, but I feel okay there now. Moving inside, we'll talk about Savane here in a minute, but James Daniels, I think perfect fit. Right, this is a guy everybody's talked about for a couple years. I think in this scheme, if healthy, I think he could be a Pro Bowl player. Right, that's how I see James. How do you like of what you've seen of James Daniels? Major upgrade over Robert Jones.
Yeah, I mean, so that might be a topic we get into also, but I think
Okay.
I see him as a right guard. So, I would say
Yes.
major upgrade over
Liam
Liam
Eichenberg.
Eichenberg.
We can also get into that, Eric.
But I mean, either, he's going to be an upgrade over either of them. I'm not sure that I'm quite as high in terms of a Pro Bowl level
Yeah.
player. I think that he's a very good fit for the system, very good mover. A very good fit for the outside zone runs. I do think that he is a guy that still struggles with short area power. Like he's explosive on the move, and if you can get him
In space.
leading,
Yeah, and that second level,
right? Then you'll see him pancake guys on the move. But in short yards, I think he's still got some issues. So I don't expect to see him, just this amazing prospect.
yeah.
There's a reason that he was only
Well,
$8 million when we
the
look
injury
at.
too. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
big. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that was a factor. But I
yeah.
mean, Aaron Banks was coming off an injury also,
Oh, he got
and
paid.
made $20 million.
Yeah,
So I do like James Daniels, right? I definitely an upgrade over either guard that he's going to replace. But I'm just not over the moon as some people are. I think it's
yeah,
a very good investment in this offensive line. I think he's going to be a great leader. Like one of the things that I was really impressed with James Daniels, we're losing Teron Armstead, who is obviously one of the all-time great when it comes to leaders in the offensive line room. But listening to Travis Wingfield's interview with James Daniels and just listening to him talk about the way that he used to communicate with the younger guys at Pittsburgh, I think he's going to go a long way towards filling that leadership void in the offensive line room.
yeah. That's. I mean, we need it, right? And that's a big look. Look at the. Did you hear all the rookies talk? Impressive kids, impressive speakers. You know what I mean? Like that was obviously a theme that they wanted to get guys who captains, workout guys who are the first in the gym, last one out. That was a very clear message. Yeah, I agree. Daniels, I think if everything works out well, like I agree. I'm worried. I'm worried that we're kind of looking at this move, and I am worried that we're kind of overthinking a little bit here, and we're expecting. I don't expect him to come right away and be this unbelievable upgrade in the beginning. Remember that Achilles injury. We got to see how he recovers, but I just think he fits like a glove here. He's a guy I've been looking at for a few years, and I think if everything goes right, he's back to 100%. I think you'll see a massive upgrade. I think over Eichenberg or Jones. But you talked about it? You see a right guard. I agree. I think his best position in the NFL is right guard. Now, here's the question: Savenay has played all over the place, right? He's played right tackle, right guard, left tackle. Do you think it's smart to have two young guys on the left side, or are you in the camp of let's keep one veteran next to Austin, let's put him next to Savenay next to Jackson, and another young guy with Paul and Daniels on the left side.
Yeah, so I think that has more to do with what is your long-term vision for the offensive line. And this is another study that I'd done this offseason, looking back over the way that both Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel have set up their offensive line since 2017 when Shanahan arrived with the 49ers. And if you look across those offensive lines, the left guard since 2017 for the 49ers has been either Laken Tomlinson or Aaron Banks, right? And those are two guys that if you look at them, they're the more squatty, wide body types that you wouldn't necessarily associate with an outside zone type guard. And you kind of saw it last year in Miami as well, with Rob Jones being your left guard and Eichenberg being the more athletic guy, right? The Dominic Pooney type of guy. And I think that, when we look at the guards that the Dolphins have, Savianaya fits a lot better in that Laken Tomlinson, Aaron Banks mold. And, James Daniel is more that athletic mover in space. So I think that, that's the long-term vision that I see for the offensive line. So I wouldn't sacrifice that for a year just to have experience playing beside inexperience, for example. And I think that that's one of those things, again, right? It's the continuity thing that, if it was Teron Armstead in and out of the lineup, then maybe that would be a little more of a conversation. But, if we can get, Patrick Paul and Savianaya playing on the left side and playing 17 games there, I think that no matter what, the first couple of games are probably going to be a little bit rocky, and that wouldn't matter which way you align them, because they're all playing, beside new guys, no matter how you shuffle that. But if you can get that same five and they're playing for 5 or 6 games together, I think that communication issue quickly goes away. And when you talk about a guy like Patrick Paul and Savianaya, those are two very high football IQ type guys that I think will, be able to catch on quickly. We've heard Mike McDaniel kind of say the same thing, that, he doesn't feel like communication is going to be an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's start the long term view already, right? Let's not just sacrifice it for the first three, and that stuff will play out during camp, right? They'll get an idea. Okay, you know what? Let's I'm more comfortable here. Butch Berry will see that. So again, to me, get the five best guys out there that you want. I agree with you long term. Let's kind of get the ball rolling of these young guys building together because you have now Austin. How many? You have Austin Jackson, you have Patrick Paul, you have Savinaya, you have Brewer's not that old, and Daniels is under 30. So you have your kind of O line going forward for the next few years. So yeah, it's a great point. Just start them out where you think they should go, and let's go for it. All right. So you're not upset about the Eichenberg reset. People get crazy about Eichenberg. Like as long as Liam Eichenberg is your sixth or seventh offensive lineman, it's fine. Like Liam makes one or two mistakes during the game that just overrides anything he does on an average level. Are you in the Liam Eichenberg is trash camp, or like as an offensive line coach, do you see why they kept him around?
Well, I mean, I see why they kept him around, right? That's position versatility, it's experience in the system, that type of thing. But he's not good, right? I'm not sitting here saying that we should have run it back with him.
Yeah.
But he's not nearly as bad as a lot of people make him out to be. Like a lot of people wanted to cut him during the season. Like if you cut Liam Eichenberg, there's going to be a bunch of teams lined up to pick him up as a reserve. They're not trying to put him in the starting lineup. But again, when I mentioned that period of 5 games where they kept the same offensive line and were averaging 150 yards a game, like Liam Eichenberg was part of that. Right? And Liam Eichenberg was not the reason for it, but the way that this system works, you can get by with a Liam Eichenberg at right guard if you have a Aaron Brewer at center and an Austin Jackson at right tackle. It's when everything falls apart that it becomes exposed. So, if we're going into 2025 and you say that, James Daniels gets dinged up and needs to be out for 2 games, right? I have no issues with Liam Eichenberg being that guy off the bench. And I'm not sure that, when you look across the league, especially in terms of free agents available, right? There's not going to be a guard out there that you bring in and you're like, yeah, okay, James Daniels misses a game, we're not going to miss a beat. That doesn't exist. So, I would rather.
He's been in your building. He's familiar with the system. You're comfortable with him. So, yeah, I agree. Go finish what you're saying. Sorry.
No, I just think that, I know people are concerned with the depth of the offensive line, but I think the Dolphins have kind of done an okay job with that as well. You brought in my opinion, Borum is more of a left guard type player.
Yeah.
So, I would like to see him be the backup to Savianaya, and that Eichenberg is more of just a right guard type player where we're not bouncing him around. That, the only time that Eichenberg should get into a game would be if something happens to James Daniels, and hopefully that's only for a short period, if at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think you made the point. I think fans would be shocked how many teams would line up to get him as a reserve offensive line. He's kind of like the Julian Hill too. Like happens to Julian Hill. Julian Hill makes a couple mistakes, but they like both of those guys in the building, and they see him every day. Now, just putting him in the right situations, putting Liam Eichenberg with Robert Jones as your 2 starting guards, you're setting them up for failure. If they were your 2 reserve guards, okay, you would say, all right, nice players. He comes in for 2 games. There's not much. He gets the job done. There's a little bit of a downgrade, but we move on. So I agree with you on that point. And yeah, Larry Borum, I also like it. I don't like him at tackle. Some of the left tackle tape. Oh, I don't know if you watch. I'm sure you watch it.
Yes.
No bueno, huh? So
no.
I'm like, they must be bringing him in for the inside or they really like Keon Smith, right? I mean, that's the other thing because I can't think who. Am I missing somebody who's the other swing tackle? Then is it Keon Smith, right? I mean, who am I missing a name?
Yeah, I mean, it's either going to be Keon Smith or Larry Borum. I think that Keon Smith is a much better fit for that. And I mean, again, right? If Larry Borum is your only reserve in there and he has to play tackle, let's say that Keon Smith doesn't recover the way that we hope, and Larry Borum has to be your 3rd tackle, right? That is, now you're hiding one position, right? We've seen this offense succeeded. The run game stuff was pretty good with Larry Borum. It was the speed stuff on the outside. So if you have, let's say your other four starters are still in, and Larry
Yeah.
Borum is your only reserve in at tackle, the quick passing game, you can send slides to his side, you can send chips to his side, you can mitigate a lot of that type of stuff if you're only replacing or you're only covering for one offensive lineman.
Yeah. Yeah. I think overall, I like this line better than last year, right? Even though we lost our, I know
Yeah.
people are worried about Armstead, but I think we'll get by with Paul. I think it's going to be a big upgrade. So I like that. And thank you, everybody in the chat. We got over 80 people in here. Guys, hit that like, subscribe button. I also got to mention we're eligible for super chats, whatever that means. I'm told I got to say that. I leave that up to you guys. If you want to help donate to what it costs to just put this show together, a little bit of it, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. I love you guys in here no matter what. But I thought I'd mention that because I was told I probably should say that. And you won't hear that too often. Anyways, all right. So let's get to the draft, right? You've done a lot of work on it. I did a lot of work on it. So leading up to the draft, everybody was Jedi Baron. And as it got closer, I said, you know what? I'm curious your opinion on Baron because as it got closer, I said, the thing about Barron is I like him. I had him my number 18th player on my board. So he went 20. So it was pretty close. I thought he was better some of the whole parts. I thought if you're truly putting him as an outside corner, you're kind of doing him an injustice. I know he did well the 1 year that he played outside corner. I just didn't see it. What was your thoughts on Barron going in the draft? Did you think he was a guy? Did you like him as a pure outside or more of that Brian Branch type guy? And maybe putting him on the outside was kind of doing him a disservice.
I mean, I think that I liked him a lot. He probably would have been my pick. And we can get into that part of it because even though he would have been my pick, seeing the way that defensive line room felt, I felt like Greer did a really good job of reading the board because my idea would have been to draft Barron at 13 and then circle back to a defensive lineman at 48. But those defensive linemen flew off the board and really wouldn't have had many options at 48. But Barron specifically, I do think that if you drafted him and you put him as a outside corner only, then yeah, I do think you're doing a disservice to him. If I was drafting him, it would have been with the vision that if we're in a base defense, that he's one of those two cornerbacks that are on the field. But we both know that in today's NFL, you've got 3 and 4 cornerbacks on the field more often than you only have 2. So Barron would have, for me, been a lot of what Jalen Ramsey is in terms of a player that can play on the outside, but you can move around and find the matchups that you like.
Yeah. I just thought I think he landed. I mean, look, he landed in a great spot with him and Patrick Surtain. That's going to be
fun.
All right. So I look at the draft as two kind of. It was the draft of its own, the first 2 picks, kind of, and then we can talk about all the way the 5th round guys. But I thought the first 2 picks. I told you backstage. I had Grant right around number 14. I had Savinai at 39. They went close there, so I thought it was the value where they should have went. I know some people differed on that. To me, I'll tell you my thoughts on Grant when I watch him is I was watching a lot of Mason Graham, and then this, he's getting double teamed. I say, you know what? I had a guest on, Benjamin Albright. I said, man, I kind of like Grant more for the Dolphins than Graham. And he goes, it's funny you say that because he was at the combine. A lot of scouts were telling him that like they kind of like Grant for the Dolphins more than Graham. And it was kind of a word that was going on, even though I think Graham's a fantastic player. To me, I don't know if you saw it. I saw Christian Wilkins every time I watched him play. Like everybody has that comp, and if you don't have that comp, it's just so obvious. But I think he's a guy who's big, athletic, knows or 1 or 2 tech. I think he can do a little 3. I know it's not. There's other guys, that probably a little bit better, but I think he's a rare prospect in that sense. And I thought they kind of had a theme with these first 2 picks: is big, physical, and athletic, and kind of with girth. And I don't think you got 2 better guys than Jonah and Grant. So give me a breakdown. We'll start with Grant here.
Yeah, so for Grant, like I did have Graham higher than Grant. I had Graham kind of in a league of his own. But the rest of those defensive tackles, going into the 40s, were all kind of grouped similar to me. And my individual rankings, I had Grant lower, but the reason that I had Grant lower was because, we've heard the free agents come in and they've talked about a 3-4 being the Dolphins' base defense. And I felt like we already had Sealer, who was one of those 3-4 defensive ends.
Who's going to be
I
the
felt
other
like
one?
we had Benito Jones, who was kind of the nose. And I thought they would be looking for more of a 5 technique on the other side. Tyreek Williams was my number 2 defensive tackle for that reason. But after the pick and really thinking about it, again, like we talked about with the cornerbacks, like even if 3-4 is your base defense, most teams are not in your base defense.
Yeah.
The majority of the time. So, usually you do have 2 defensive tackles on the field, right? And usually if you have 2 defensive tackles on the field, you want that guy that can play in a 3 or a 4-eye technique. And then you want that guy that's the 0 to 2-eye, right? Sealer is your
Classic
prototype guy that you want is a 3 technique. So, pair that with somebody that complements that well, and nobody is going to complement that better than Kenneth Grant is, right? And I'm not here saying that he is.
You're talking about on the base defense,
right?
When you're running the
when you're a 4-man front.
You're thinking the 3-man front would be the issue. What you would go Benito, Sealer, and then Grant. But you thought, okay, how many times are we going to do that? Let's
Right. And it's not that Grant can't do that. Like when we go to that 3-man front, Grant can play out in the 5. It's not where I want to see him most of the time, but I don't think that we're going to have to do that. So I think that when you look at the way that those two complement each other, and like I said, I'm not sitting here calling Grant just a nose, even though most teams in a 4-man front, they label them that 3 technique as a tackle and that 1 technique they call them a nose by label. But Grant is a player that has some flexibility with that too, right? You don't, if Sealer goes off the field, you don't have to replace him with another 3 technique because Grant has that versatility, right? You can bump Grant over to play 3 technique and bring Benito in to play nose, right? Or you can leave Grant on the field and you can replace Sealer with somebody else like a Jordan Phillips. I'm sure we'll talk about as well. So I think that when you look at it from a 4-man front perspective, there was no better fit in the draft to pair with Zach Sealer than Kenneth Grant. So I completely get and appreciate the pick that they made there.
Yeah, I see your point though on when they do the they go 3-man. It's I thought of that myself. What would it look like with the current guys they got now? It's kind of hard to fill that 3rd spot. Like who would it be, right? So that's interesting. And the funny thing is Savanaya and Savianaya and Grant are 2 guys I identified early in the process. So it was strange for the first time they actually took the guys. But moving on to Jonah here, we'll call him that. Everybody questioned the trade up. He was the last guy for me that I didn't have to project. Mm-hmm. Like I liked Ursere, but like I would have to project him inside. If you want big, physical, and I think the pass blocking is better than the run blocking. People wouldn't expect that looking at him, right? They think, he's got strong hands. I mean, it's. But I even want to see him more aggressive in the running game. But I think he comes in day 1, Eric, and he gives you solid pass blocking. Everybody was talking about that he didn't fit the scheme. I saw plenty of athletic guys. So when he ran that 40, I was like, okay, yeah, it's justified. That's what I see. I think there's more room to grow him there. I think I even want him to get more aggressive, Eric.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's funny, we talked about in the pre-show stuff about how a lot of our views have lined up. Yeah. And that was the same thing with me in terms of these interior offensive linemen. I had a lot of them that were grouped very similarly. I had Ursere in that same bucket, but I view Ursere as more of a tackle-only player, so I wouldn't have felt great about that projection into guard. In terms of guards that I could sit here and confidently say
Rutledge was the only other guy, right? You think maybe
I had him lower.
Yeah, so did I. The age, I wasn't as high in Rutledge. I thought he was the last guy. I think it was a good move to go get Jonah.
Yeah, I mean, Jonah was the last guy that I felt like you could sit there and the second that you draft him, you say he is our starting guard. Everybody else, I think that might not have felt as comfortable with. So I had no issues at all with the trade up to go get him. and like we talked about earlier, right? In terms of the prototype left guard that I see for this system, right? Jonah, and Tyler Booker's another subject,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But
I think Tyler Booker would have been fine. People were overreacting in that whole Tyler
yeah,
Booker thing.
but
Yeah,
yeah, those
that's
two
another
guys,
that's
yeah,
another
yeah.
topic.
but those two guys are like the prototype for what I see as the left guard in this
The
offense.
Aaron Bank,
You know,
you were talking about him, yeah.
yeah, you talk about, we're not where James Daniels is really good in open field, right? That's not necessarily Jonah's game, but Jonah has plenty of quickness to climb in the short area and get to a linebacker or seal off a one
Yeah.
technique on the backside. He's plenty
He
quick
turns
enough
it.
in
He'll turn them
the
inside.
short
He'll
area
turn
stuff for
them.
that.
Yeah.
And same way you talk with the pass blocking. I mean, when you watch him at tackle, the areas that he struggled was when there was a wide 9 type alignment and he had to kick out into space and work in space. But you looked at more of those closed formations where he had a tight end and the defensive end couldn't really, work in as much space. Like,
He's hold anchor. Yeah.
right. His anchor was wonderful. He's everything that you want in a guard in pass protection. So I think that he's going to be a great fit as a guard in this system.
Yeah. So I like the first 2 picks, and then we trade. Whatever you think of the trade, you traded back. Whatever, we ended up in the 5th round. I call them the 5th round triplets. We talked. You mentioned Jordan Phillips. We'll start with him quickly. What I see with him is a guy who, man, in a couple years you might have something here. I think as a starting nose, zero tech. He's a true nose. Like I think he could be a starting athletic nose in the league eventually. And people say he's like a ball of muscle. I agree when I watch him. He's a high school wrestler, and you see that he plays with good leverage. I think the upside, the reason he probably went in the 5th round is because the lack of pass rush and the length. Right? He's not tall. It kind of limits his ceiling a little bit. But man, I think in a couple years you could have a starter in Jordan Phillips. He's only 20 years old, 21 years old.
Yeah, I really like that pick. Like you said, the length I think is going to be one of his big limiting factors. I don't see him as a 3 or a 5 technique having to work against
No.
offensive tackles. Don't think he's going to hold up well there. I'm not as concerned about his pass rush productivity. If you just turn on the film, like almost any game that you turn on, you're going to see a couple of reps where he's taking
There's
a
juice.
guard
There's
or a
juice.
center,
Yeah, there's juice.
and basically running him back to past the quarterback and doing almost literally everything you can do except for get the sack, right? So that's the kind of thing that's going to develop. I did feel that at times in games he did not hold up in the run game as well. So I wouldn't have been crazy about him in the 2nd or 3rd round, being the guy to pair with Zach Sealer. But when we're talking about a 5th round guy that's going to play 200 to 300 snaps, I think that's where you're going to get the best juice out of him. That you're limiting his snaps, right? Maybe that's your opportunity where when you get into some passing downs, right? Maybe Kenneth Grant's a little winded, right? Now you go Sealer at 3 technique and you put Jordan Phillips in there to wreak some havoc as a 1 technique in there for a couple of plays. So I think he complements what they have very well. And like you said, I mean, the kid's young, hard worker. You heard Dante Trader talking about how he's in the facilities before Trader is. So big upside there, and can certainly see a scenario where he can develop into that, 500 to 600 snap player. But even today, I see that him as somebody that can step on the field and make an impact in limited reps as a rookie.
Yeah, I think you put him in sparingly to kind of show his strengths, because I just think this guy I could see him being a starting nose in this league though eventually. Like I think his best football's ahead. Again, in the 2nd or 3rd round, no, but like in the 5th round, and even the guy they got in the 7th round, we'll talk about. There's some upside there with him. All right, so then they went with Jason Marshall Jr. He's interesting. I'm a guy who I love the eyeball test, right? I remember watching the movie Moneyball, and they talked about jaw lines, right? And I'm I've been doing this as a kid since I was 11, watching players, and like you feel like, oh man, I kind of. So I look at him and I see looks like a starting corner, like even a starting safety physically. He was a big time recruit. We had somebody on from Florida on SI talking about him, and he was a big time 5-star recruit. Chose Florida over Miami, and when I watched him, the thing with him was a little frustrating. It was really inconsistent, but man, He mirrored receivers well. He's got good feet. He's fluid hips. He doesn't get picks, but he's always around the ball, and I think there's something to be said for that. Like, I think, okay, he didn't get the picks, but he ton of pass breakups, had the injury, played against top SEC receivers, like guys who got drafted high, but effort sometimes a little weird as far as tackling. He's not a guy who wants to come up and hit you. I think he's got to forget about the tools that he has, and I think it's up to him. I think there's a spot in this roster for playing time. I think it's how good he wants to be, because I think the tools are there. He's an interesting prospect, but again, you probably seen it as well. There's a lot of inconsistencies on film.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized that very well in terms of what I saw in him. I mean, the tools are there. You see the way that he can mirror, and listeners are not going to like this comparison, but I can see a lot of the same stuff that I see in Cam Smith in terms of a player that physically has all the tools to be a really good player.
Yeah.
But, like you said, the tackling is questionable. The effort can be questionable. I think the biggest thing with Jason Marshall for me is that it's either, contributor on defense or bust for him. I don't see a great special teams role for him. Yeah. So if he doesn't come in and impress during training camp, and I'm not expecting him to go out there and start opposite Cater Kohu, right? But if he can come in and he can solidify a position as like the fourth corner on the roster or something like that, then I think he's got a pretty solid footing to make the roster. But if he's getting pushed down below Cater Kohu's Cam Smith, Storm Duck, Ethan Bonner, right? I think he could be in real danger of, being a fifth rounder that gets cut as a rookie, just because I don't see that special teams value with him.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's either he's showing stuff early and we're hearing his name a lot, or like he's that surprise cut that'll make it and either get picked up or he'll be on the practice squad. Like, I don't think there's any in between with him. I think it's a great point you make. And the next guy we're going to talk about, I don't think that about, right? I think special teams. Here's the thing about Dante Trader Jr. I love the kid, right? You hear him talk, impressive. He's like a guy you could see as a captain, a special teams captain. His testing is like an undrafted free agent. And you see it on film, right? There's certain situations where you see the long speed or explosion is not there, but I do see the lacrosse background when he plays. He plays downhill, and we talk about the low missed tackle rate. It's not spectacular. There's not these thumping hits like you see from other safeties in the draft, like a Nick Amanwari, but he finds a way to get it done. So the question with him is the athleticism, right? Is it gonna work? And is it gonna work? Because he's got unbelievable football intelligence. You see it. He's a step or two ahead, thinking wise. Now his feet can move as fast, we'd be having a different story. But he's interesting. I think he's a guy who's going to make the team and contribute on special teams. And if you put him in the right situation, Eric, I think where he won't get exposed as much, he can make plays. Like he's a playmaker.
Yeah, again, great evaluation of him from you on that.
Thank you.
I see him very much the same way, right? You got the low missed tackle rate, so he is effective with that, right? But when you talk about a player that doesn't have the long speed, doesn't have the explosive type ball skills to break on balls, stuff like that, a lot of times you expect more of that thumper, more of the guy that when you talk about a guy with his athletic profile, you would like to see more of like a Chancellor type guy that's gonna make receivers play going over the middle, and that's not his game.
You don't want to compare it to you don't want to compare it to a shortstop who doesn't make the spectacular plays but consistently makes the routine ones. That's kind of how he tackles, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That does make sense. And I think that, like you said, opposite conversation of Jason Marshall. I think that Trader is basically a lock to make the roster because this guy played special teams at Maryland, shows a willingness to do anything that you ask him to do. So even if he is your fifth, sixth safety on the roster, he's going to be part of every special teams unit, and he's going to find a way onto the field. And also, like you said, I don't ever think that he's going to be an impact defender, right? But if you have a good defense and you have to put him on the field, right, I can see him being kind of what the Dolphins wanted Jordan Poyer to be this past season in terms of the glue guy that's going to get guys into the right position. But, so you're not, a guy that you're not asking him to do a lot individually, but the guy that's identifying the formations, that's getting other guys into the right positions, getting you into the right coverage checks, that type of thing. So he can find a place on the defense eventually, but if you have a bad defense and you put Trader out there, I think that he's going to be a player that gets exposed. If you have a good defense and he's your 10th or 11th player on the field, essentially, then I think that, he can have value there.
Yeah, he's like a role player in basketball, right? You put a Duncan Robinson on a bad team, he's not, but you put him around good players. It's kind of how I agree. I mean, our thoughts are aligned here. Like you can he played everywhere there. He played slot a little bit, and he just doesn't, like, he's not big. The tackle rate would lead you to believe that he's just big hitting safety, but like he also doesn't. He doesn't have the speed and the athleticism to play that free deep safety. So it's like kind of worry. He's kind of be like this Swiss Army knife where Anthony Weaver can use and kind of put in the right situations. But all right, let's go to Ollie Gordon. Again, the 23 tape versus the 24 tape. Everybody talks about that. So I was not like. Here's the thing. I wasn't very high on Ollie Gordon coming to the draft. I didn't like what I saw at the combine. Again, we talk about body types and things like that. He looks the part, but it was just something. So let me go back and look. Everybody's like, oh, forget about the 24 tape, put on the 23. 23 decisive, hit the right holes, breaking arm tackles, unbelievable, right? 24 tape, I said, okay, what do they do? Crowd the box on him? Not really, like nothing out of the ordinary. Now, the talent around him wasn't as good, I'll admit. Mm-hmm. So, which guy is he? I don't think he's either one of those guys. You know what I mean? Like, how about that? Like, I don't think he's as good as a 1,700-yard Doak Walker. There's no way. And then he can't be that bad. The tape was awful last year. So, like, what am I expecting? A short yardage guy, two early down back, a pass catcher? I don't know what to make of it, but I do like what he brings to the room that we don't have there. But where do you sit on the tape here, man? Are you more 23 or 24?
So I'm pretty sure that somewhere out there's a video of me saying the exact same thing that you just said. That he's not the 1,700-yard back, but he's also not the 800-yard back. That he's somewhere in between. I don't see him as a big physical inside zone runner. He's not a pile mover in my opinion. But the way that I do see him, and I think the big difference between 23 and 24 is that in 23, kind of like a pickup truck that has to get, needs a little time to get moving, but then is just going to run through everything. So I think that, in 23, when he had some better blocking and he was able to get to those second level defenders, right, he's got that momentum and he's able to run through those tackles then. Whereas in 24, he was getting contacted a lot earlier. It sounds kind of weird, but I saw a lot of the same runner in 23 and 24. I really liked the way that Ollie Gordon was, reading the play the way that it's supposed to be, really reading those outside zone runs, especially. I think that if you could get him behind a solid offensive line, like I think we're going to have with Miami, and him running the outside zone, I could see him being the next, Shanahan style running back that, nobody really expected anything out of. And, eventually an injury happens, he gets in there and he ends up surprising a lot of guys. In terms of the immediate type contributions from him, he's obviously a very willing pass blocker. Would like to see him not go for the cut block as often, but he's a big physical guy. He can hold up in there, and his pass catching is really
underrated, right?
Underrated. Like the way that he adjusts to poor passes and that he's able to smoothly bring it in and get into the run afterwards, I think is going to be a very valuable piece of the puzzle early on. But I think that outside zone, I think that he is going to impress people, more than some may expect on that, and that the pass blocking, the pass catching is going to be where he gets his touches.
How do you feel about him in the outside stretch zone? Like, I don't think I know everybody looks at him as big. He didn't run well. He's not overly creative as a back. Like, he's limited, right? He's not a creative back. But like you think the outside zone, it's going to fit more than people just look on surface, right? With the athletic testing numbers.
Yeah. I think he takes a little time to get up to speed, but that's one of the things with the outside zone that, you're not asked to necessarily go 0 to 60 as soon as the ball snapped, right? They want you taking those three steps and reading what's in front of you and then making your cut off
Yeah.
of that. And you're not, they're not asking you to make big jump cuts or anything like that. It's just little alterations to the path you're taking. And that's where, if you get those three steps, you got that read. And then, by step 5, 6, you're hitting the lane that they want you on, right? By then, a guy like Gordon is getting up to speed, right? And that's where he's able to run through some of those arm tackles, right? And if you run through an arm tackle at 5 yards, right, that's the kind of stuff that turns into the 15, 20 yards. And, he's obviously not going to be Chan and breaking one for 80
Right.
yards or anything like that, but you can still get a lot of mileage out of a running back that can get you 20 and 30-yard gains.
Yeah, and the thing with him is too is the speed though. I think speed does matter though in this system a little bit, and he just, I mean, the 4.61 kind of concerns me a little bit, but we'll see. I mean, I do think there's a little more flexibility there in the outside stretch zone. All right, let's move on to the quarterback, who everybody talks about, Quinn Ewers. Quinn. I tried to sell myself on Quinn during the pre-draft press because I had a feeling they were going to take him. When I look at Quinn, he's got a great throwing motion, a lot of soft stuff, great touch. I just want to see him plant that foot, man, and drive it. Does he have it? It's almost like we had because we had a series where we had a bunch of riders from the colleges that the players we drafted. He said, look, he has the arm. He thinks the oblique was the problem. But I haven't seen in a few years the zip and the velocity. So I asked him, do you think it can come back? Does he just need rest? Because the body's not great, right? It's not a great body. I think he landed in the right spot, though. What are your thoughts on? I'm curious your thoughts on Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought on Quinn Ewers is why not? We're talking about a 7th round pick here. We're not talking about investing a day 2 pick on a quarterback. I think that a big part of it is, when you look at last year when Tua went out and they brought Skylar Thompson in and they tried to run the Tua offense with Skylar Thompson, and it was a massive failure. I think that Quinn Ewers is a player that's been in a similar offense, and he can, not going to put a team on his back, right? But he does a good job of making those initial reads and usually making, the right throw early in a play. It's kind of as the play break down where, everything goes to crap with him. But I think that in terms of, if again, you develop that offensive line in front of him, you get some more consistency at the run game, and you bring a guy in like Ewers who has experience in this system, right? Maybe you can get by for a couple of games where he's just being a caretaker. We're running that quick hit passing game, just getting the ball out of his hands quick, the way that Skylar Thompson was not able to do. But I mean, in reality, he's not beating out Zach Wilson this year as quarterback 2. So you have an entire year. You're going to have more than 12 months of having him in the building to decide whether or not he's worth keeping around as your quarterback 2. So again, right, we're the physical tools are there. My description of him is a player who excelled physically as he came up through and was never really forced to learn the intricacies of the game. I feel like that's kind of the way that he played. He never found that refinement. And again, right, 7th round pick, low risk. You've got 12 months. If he doesn't commit to that, then you cut him loose and nothing's lost. But even if he develops into a quarterback 2 and he's your quarterback 2 for 4 years, that's a massive win for a 7th round pick. So like I said, my overall opinion on him is, physically talented, and why not?
Yeah, I didn't see him. Everybody, he's a 3rd or 4th round pick. I didn't see that. I thought,
Yeah.
I think 6th or 7th rounds probably where he probably should have went. I think people made too much of a deal about, it wasn't a Shedeur Sanders slide. You know what I mean? I think people made a too big of a deal of that, and I agree. What do you think about the quarterback room in general this year? I kind of like the upside-ish. Let's see what Mike McDaniel can do. Do I think Zach Wilson is going to become a great quarterback under Mike McDaniel? No. Well, at least it's not like if everything, the stars aligned, McDaniel got him. I know for a fact that they in Denver behind the scenes, that coaching tree loved him, loved what he was doing. I was told that. So, and this is obviously a Mike McDaniel target. So when everybody says, "Oh, Quinn Ewers number 2, he's not beating out," I'd be shocked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This was a calculated target for Mike McDaniel. I'm curious to see what Mike can get out of him, though. Like, at least there's some ceiling there. Like, even if you hit everything right with Skyler, you knew at best fragile, fringe backup. At least there's some ability. I kind of like that about this room this year.
Yeah, I mean, short term, the move doesn't impress me, right? I would have preferred to see, a more veteran guy that has a little more proven track record, in terms of a guy that, I don't feel any more comfortable for 2025. If Tua misses 4 or 5 games, I don't feel any more confident in Wilson's ability to go
Yeah.
3-2 or 4-1 than I did last year with Tyler Huntley. But like you said, when you look at it long term, I would love to sit here and say that I'm confident that Tua is the quarterback for the next decade. But, it'd be irresponsible to sit here and ignore the injury history and ignore the possibility that, it's not the end of the injury history. So, from that perspective, I don't think that Zach Wilson gives us any worse of a chance to win than Huntley did last year, right? So I think you're
The floor is
kind
the
of
same.
saying,
The floor is the
yeah,
same.
yeah,
The ceilings may be higher.
right.
If that's fair to
The
say.
floor is the same.
Yeah.
And, if you go through 2025, and again, God forbid that something happens to Tua again, right? If Tua misses time with a concussion again in 2025, I can't see a scenario where he's the quarterback in
Oh no.
2026. So a guy like Zach Wilson, again, maybe it's not you're not excited about the prospect today of that being your quarterback in 2026, but at the same time, it's like you said, a talented player that you're getting in house. You're getting him into the system, and if something happens to Tua in 2025, you kind of know whether or not you can try Zach Wilson in the future, or whether you need to go and trade up in the draft and go get one of the top quarterbacks, or something along those lines. So very much the same opinion there in terms of, doesn't do a whole lot for me in terms of 2025 backup, but I can see the vision there of trying to develop a young talented player.
Coach, I'm feeling happy. I'm aligned with somebody who coaches. I feel like on all subjects, I'm like, this is pretty cool, man. Because sometimes you get guys on and your opinions don't match, and I mean, you don't want everything to match, but like,
Right.
cool that we kind of we put the work in. You see some sort of the same things, and that's pretty makes you feel good, right? All right, so
Absolutely.
shout out to Crazy Dolphin. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everybody in the chat. We have about 100 people in here. Guys, make sure you like and subscribe. Come on YouTube and join us. We're hanging out here talking Dolphins ball with Coach Eric Smith from 5 Reasons Sports and scouting the Fins. All right, so quickly we'll wrap up the draft pick. Zeke Biggers, and then talk about Zeke Biggers, and then give me 1 or 2 undrafted guys you like. I'll give you mine is Theo Weiss because over Armstrong, because for a big receiver, his run after the catch is pretty good, man. And he who led that team in reception yards? It wasn't Luther Burden. It was Theo White. Like I'm not saying he's going to make the team, but I follow the money a lot because that tells you what they think of him, how much they sign him for. It doesn't always work out like that, but I like his run after the catch ability. But there's a few guys, the tight end. I like a few guys of these undrafted free agents. So give me your quick thoughts on Biggers and give me a couple UDFAs you like.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit earlier about what you do in that base 3-4 defense. I think that Biggers is maybe a guy with that length that can give you some snaps as that 5 technique run stopper, right? He's not going to give you much of anything at all in the pass game, but I think that's the frame that you can put out there. He's got the length to be able to combat offensive tackles in the NFL. But again, similar to Trader in the sense that even if he's not he's not going to be one of your top defensive tackles, right? But he can still be in there in your field goal extra point block teams. He's got those long arms, get up there, get in the way. So he adds some value to the roster, even if he's not in defensively. But I do think there's opportunities, right? Short yardage. If you go back and watch some of the goal line type reps with him, he's not getting driven backwards. So there are packages that you can find for Zeke Biggers to be on the field. In terms of my undrafted free agent guys. I agree that when it comes to those receivers, that Weiss is the guy that I would be keeping an eye on.
Weiss, that's how you say it.
Arm,
Yeah, Weiss.
that's how I
Yeah,
guess. I
yeah.
don't know.
I-
That's what I'm going with.
yeah, yeah.
Armstrong, I don't see enough of a fluid athlete. And then Baldwin is just tiny. I think that Weiss brings
He's
a little bit
fun
of
though,
something.
man. He's his
Oh,
his. Oh,
he
he's
is.
fun, man. Like I could see
He
him making a
is.
play or two in preseason. Gonna return.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he's gonna. Yeah, there's gonna be some
McDaniel's gonna love
flashes
him.
there in preseason. There's gonna be videos on Twitter, and everybody's
Oh
gonna
yeah,
talk about him taking
yeah.
Tyreek Hill's spot. But then you talked about Conyers a little bit. I think that Conyers is probably the most likely undrafted free agent to be able to make the roster. I think that when we talk about the tight ends, and I see tight ends kind of having two separate positions in terms of being one being a Y tight end in line type guy, where you had your Julian Hill and your Pharaoh Brown, and the other side of it being more of your F or move tight end, where it's obviously Jonnu Smith, and you've been trying to develop Tanner Connor there. But I think that Jalen Conyers slotting in there behind Jonnu Smith is probably the most likely path to making the roster. Kind of a surprise guy for me, not necessarily for 2025. I think that Nate Noel does a lot of
Okay.
good stuff in the outside zone scheme. I think that when you look at the type of stuff that we're looking at Devon Achane to do in the receiving game, I think there's a lot of crossover there. So again, I don't see that being a 2025 thing. But if you told me that Nate Noel was going to hang out on the practice squad and in 2 to 3 years was going to make it to the active roster, playing some of those same type of roles as what Achane does, I could definitely see that. And then we talked about the undrafted free agent offensive lineman a little bit in Preeb and Addison West and Teddy Cushi. I think that any of those three could make the roster. I could see a scenario where any of them. I don't think all three are. I think probably only one of them is. I think a lot of it's going to come down to what they need, right? Do you need a tackle? If you need a tackle, Teddy Cushi, right, has a lot of those prototype skills. That's probably the one that will probably most spend another year on the practice squad to develop. In terms of the guy that has the skills today, but maybe needs to work more on technique. And then Preeb is kind of the opposite of that in terms of a guy that has the technique, but needs to develop those physical skills. I think that Preeb could possibly cross train at center as well, and maybe becomes your Liam Eichenberg type 3-position interior defensive line or offensive line versatile guy. But we talked a little pre-show about that one, that I think that the play strength is not there for him. So I think he's a player that could benefit from a couple of years in an NFL strength program, and then maybe make an appearance as a reserve and work his way up and just not be a liability when he's put in there. And then Addison West is probably the one that as far as the undrafted free agent offensive lineman that I think could make an impact earliest of these three. And I don't think it's going to happen because I fully expect Jonah and James Daniels to be the starters. I'm not sure he jumps Liam or Larry Borum right away, but Addison West has solid athleticism and shows a lot of veteran savvy in the way that he uses his hands, has some great grip strength and torque. And I think that, you could put Addison West in today. And I think that you could be okay. Again, not, if you have a bad offensive line, the type of guy that's going to get exposed. But if you've got 4 good starters and Addison West is the guy that you're dropping in there, I think you can get by with a player like that, even as a rookie.
Yeah. So shout out to the Fins Talk Sports Network. Friends of mine, Bobby over there, go check out their work. They do great stuff. Shout out to them. All the guys, Steve, Bobby, uh, Evan, all the Fin stands, everybody over there. Make sure you guys go check out their content. Not just Dolphins, but they got everything over there. Heat, Marlins, wrestling. So make sure you check them out. All right. So let's kind of take a look now. We're June 1st is coming. The Ramsey situation. The one thing that it's obvious with the I don't know your take on it, but to me it seems like, look, he doesn't think this team's going to win. He's not buying into the coaching staff. They don't want him. They very clearly don't want him to cancer the locker room here. Like, it seems like he has that ability, which is a direct reflection on the lack of leadership at the head coach position and the locker room. I think in total, right? If you let the one player kind of, because I think behind the scenes that's what's going on. Him and McDaniel's relationship, whatever it is, he's just not buying into it. I don't know if they like each other or not, and they don't want him to kind of, spoil the locker room. Is there a world where you just say, man, look, you're under contract, we want to win, you're getting paid, play, right? And I don't see that happening. It looks like he's going to be gone. What are your thoughts on the Ramsey situation? And what ultimately, what do you think they'll get for him? 4th round pick?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those deals where a tiger doesn't change his stripes, right? This is what Jalen Ramsey has done his entire career in terms of forcing his way out. This is the kind of risk that you take. We talked about earlier in the show about the idea of trying to get those quick wins, right? If we had won some playoff games or made a deep playoff run with that iteration, right, you wouldn't necessarily be seeing this because everybody would be a little more happy around the building, stuff like that. But I think that when you look at a Tyreek Hill, a Jalen Ramsey, like you have to know that if things go south, that those are the type of players that are going to, want to jump ship. I don't think that you can just tell him to line up and play. We saw it last year when he kind of forced his way into a contract restructure, by had a mystery leg injury that might have kept him out of the opener, and then suddenly he gets a new contract and he's 100% healthy. So I think the same thing would happen. If you keep him on the roster and he doesn't want to be here, I think that he's going to overplay those nagging injuries into stuff that saying that he can't even be on the field. So I think that he has to be gone. And I don't, as far as what you get for him, I don't know. It's all supply and demand, right? If you found a team that was desperate for a starting cornerback and was close to, contending for a championship, then maybe that's the type of team that you could get a 3rd or a 4th round pick for Ramsey, right? But if you're just talking, going out into the NFL and finding an average of what teams are willing to give up, like you're probably not going to get any more than a day 3 pick for him. I mean, what was it that we traded for him from the Rams? It was around 3 and 100 long. Like that's nothing, right? And now you're talking about a player that has probably a more expensive contract than what he had coming from the Rams. He's older and he has, kind of extended his track record as to how he operates, right? So he's not as valuable even as what he was when the Dolphins got him. So I would be surprised if we got anything better than a midday 3 pick for him. Hopefully what I would prefer to see is that, maybe you package him up with a pick, right? Maybe it's that future 3rd round pick, and you can find a player that, maybe not quite as good of a player, but a player that you can at least confidently put in there as a starting cornerback and turn that into a replacement player for him. Yeah. But if it's Ramsey for a pick, then I think you're probably looking at a midday 3 based on what he is.
Yeah, maybe you can get somebody who's a little bit younger, maybe on, not as good, but younger, and you can plug him in. We'll see. That's going to be interesting. I expect them to have 1 or 2 guys at least. I don't know if it's a trade route. I don't know if it's going to be. I wouldn't mind kicking the tires on Asante Samuel Jr. I also saw them today. I don't know who reported about Jared Wills. They were the former. I mean, I would take. Why not? Right? Like, look, we talked about Keon Smith and Larry Borum as the tackles. All right, a few more topics here. We'll wrap it up quickly on the Tyreek Hill stuff. Your opinion on it. Here's the thing with Tyreek. I thought they should have had foresight, and I always compared it to the Jimmy Butler situation. Not the same, but to think this stuff's going to get better. Like, as soon as you win 3 in a row and the ball's not going to him and it's going somewhere else, this is not going to stop, right? There's obviously a little bit beef with him and Tua, whether it's obvious, right? The whole listing, which is dumb to talk about. He knew what he was doing. Do you think that I thought they should have moved off him last year? But the problem is they know they need him because this offense is not only Tyreek Hill and the numbers he puts up, but the gravity he pulls. It completely changes if you take him out of the picture, right? How do you feel? But at this point, is it addition by subtraction? If you're really trying to change the culture and demeanor and tone of your franchise, how would you have handled it? Would you have gone off him last year, even before this?
Yeah, I mean Tyreek Hill is a roller coaster of opinions. I think
Yeah,
the
it's
opinions on him
crazy.
change
He's an
from
alien
week
player,
to
though,
week.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Dude,
yeah,
if he's right, there's nobody like him.
yeah.
What I would have done personally is that I never would have given him the extension last year because I had been looking forward to this year being that opportunity that you could move off of him. Obviously, when you signed that extension last year, you made that a lot more difficult to do. And I don't know what kind of player Tyreek Hill is. And that could be a lot of what's going into the decision from an organization standpoint because Tyreek Hill is the same knucklehead off the
Yeah,
field
he
that
came
he's
out of
always
college. Yeah,
been, right? He every time he puts one of those tweets out, he
so dumb.
knows exactly what he's doing.
Yes.
And he's been doing it his entire time with the Dolphins, right? The only reason that it's getting the as much gravity as it is now is that he wasn't 1,000-yard receiver last year,
Yeah.
right? And we don't
Great.
know outside the building how much of that was the wrist, right? So did Tyreek Hill really fall off a cliff in terms of the talent, or was that wrist, really that significant, right? And if Mike McDaniel's sitting there and saying, the wrist was what was behind that drop in production, then I could get why they're not eager to move off of it. From my perspective, you know, I said I get it if he is the same receiver movement wise, and that if the wrist is back to 100%, that we're looking at another 15 or 1,700-yard season out of him, then I kind of get why you deal with the headaches. I think that one of the things that Tyreek has done over his career is shown an ability to, when he's in the facility, to be focused short term, right? He's still going to do the outside the facility stuff. He's still
Yeah.
going to have the incident at the marina. He's still going
Yeah.
to have
All the wife.
arguments with his wife,
Yeah.
right? All that nonsense,
A new
right?
wife. You know what
But
I mean? Yeah.
but when he came to Miami, right, that first year, he's like the model teammate. He's the tone setter at practice. They talked about all of that stuff, right? And if you feel like for 2025 that you can get that guy back, that Tyreek is saying, that Tyreek understands how much damage he has done to himself with the on-field stuff, and you feel like for a year you can get that player back, I'm okay with running it back. In a time where the team has to win. Like we can't go through and have a sub 500 year like
Yeah.
that. That's not acceptable. If they moved off them tomorrow, and I don't even care about the price of it,
Yeah.
I'm not shedding a tear. But I also get why, if it was the wrist in 2024, why you would be reluctant to do that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The wrist. I mean, it was significant enough to have two surgeries, timed apart, right? So, I mean, if they and apparently he's been good in the building. Like he comes in, he works hard. Again, they have more information than we do. I'm just saying on the surface, if you're trying to change things, but again, when your job's on the line, he's a tough player to move on from because he changes everything. Like you know what I mean. If they lost him tomorrow, there's no doubt this team's going to be different offensively,
Yeah.
right? They would have to. I mean, their style would completely change. The fastball would go from 97 to 92, and then you better be develop a good change. All right, so look, and I don't want to be doing. I love this team. We do this content. We both spend a lot of time. We want them to win. There's not all doom and gloom. If things go right, there's enough talent on this team. If things break right, Tua's relatively healthy. The team's relatively healthy. Like there's not, you're going to have injuries, but both of your ends are not out. Like, and some of the rookies step up in the running games. This could be a 10-11 win team, easy, right? There is that path. You saw the schedule. How do you feel the state of the Dolphins now? That was the title of this. Where do you see this team this coming year? How do you feel about it? Again, assuming Jalen Ramsey is going to move off, and assuming there'll be a cornerback in there at some sort. We don't know who. Let's say it's a Rasul Douglas type. How do you feel about this team going into the 25-26 season?
I'm probably more optimistic than most. And I did a video earlier this offseason
Okay.
looking at the way that the roster has evolved with Chris Greer, right? And pretty much every year, even though it may not feel like it, when injuries have obviously been a big factor. But when you go from year to year to year, looking at the individual positions, almost every position has gotten better each year that Greer has been here. When you look at the players that are actually on the field. And I think that in a lot of ways, you're going to see the same thing happen in 2025, right? I mean, quarterback is obviously going to be better than what we had last year, assuming that Tua stays healthy. Your wide receivers, right? Now you've got Westbrook Akine and Malik Washington that's replacing Braxton
You got some
Berrios.
size now there. You
Your
got some size.
right, your offensive line as a group should be better than what it was. The running backs kind of a wash there when
Yeah.
you're going from what Mostert was in 24 to what you expect Wright and Gordon to be.
Safety's a
Um,
wash, I think. I mean, you can't get worse than that. I don't
yeah,
know
yeah,
what to expect.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
definitely not worse.
I can't say it's better, but
Right.
yeah.
When you look at the depth of the linebackers, right? You're returning the same linebackers you had last year, and you're
Willie
replacing
Gay.
a
We
Duke
forgot about
Riley.
yeah. And
Right. KJ Britt, Willie Gay are much better than what you had before. And then, we can keep going through the list, but I think
yeah.
the big thing in terms of being optimistic is the return of Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips. Like, these are guys that we haven't seen together for like 2 years now.
Yeah.
And I think that when you talk about the issues in the secondary, pass rush goes a long way towards covering up a lot of that, right? And when you look at how devastating it was in the Super Bowl when the Eagles could just get after it with their front four. And this defensive line has that same potential, right? If you get, you know, Chubb, Sealer, and Phillips rotating on the edge, or Chubb, Phillips, and
Chop.
Chop
Yeah.
rotating on the edge, right? You get Sealer, you get Jordan Phillips, you get Kenneth Grant, those guys rotating on the interior. Like, you can create that same type of pressure, and that's going to make your day a lot easier on the secondary. In addition to the ability to stop the run, right? It makes a big difference if you can stop the run on first and second down, and you can get into those second and third and long situations where the pass is predictable. That makes it a lot easier on the secondary. So I think there's a lot of things going for the Dolphins. Obviously, health is a big deal for that. I think the schedule really works out favorably for the Dolphins. I think that some of those early season matchups are either teams that are kind of in flux also, or teams the Dolphins should just be more talented than. And when the Dolphins have the same coordinators coming back, they should hit the ground running a little quicker than some of these teams they're going to be playing. And you obviously have that really, tough stretch of 3 games finishing up with the game in Spain. But the flip side of that is that, even if you struggle through that stretch, you come off of there and you have a bye after Madrid. And then I think that you come back and play the Saints after that. So there's, even if you come out of that 3 game stretch and you went 0-3 and things look awful, you get 2 weeks to get your mind right, and then get a very winnable game to get back on track. So, and you avoided the severe cold weather games. The outside of Spain don't have a ton of travel. So I think the schedule, I think really lines up favorably for the Dolphins to, surprise some people, especially the guys that are,
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
6-7 wins.
Oh yeah, I don't see that. This team that'd have to be a Tua out for significant amount of games. Tua keeps your floor pretty at that 9-win. That's
Yeah.
when Tua's your quarterback. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the great point you made about Chubb and Phillips coming back. Not only that, it allows you to use Chop more. Like, you remember when they used to use Jason, moving him around. Like, he's not going to get it. Because look, setting the edge is not the strength of Chop Robinson, right? But hopefully he gets better in that. But I think with those other guys, you can really use Chop, and because he really improved his cadence and timing coming off the edge. It really, really improved during the season. So let's leave it on that positive note. I'll tell you, Eric, this has been enjoyable for me to talk to somebody who I could just go back and forth with and talk ball. I hope everybody in the chat, everybody who's watching, thank you guys so much. I appreciate everybody who comes in, every single person who watches. Eric, before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find you, what you got going on. Promote whatever you got.
Yeah, so most of my stuff is on either Twitter or YouTube. A lot of it under my handle there at LL Coach Smith 63, and then also contributor on 5 Reasons Sports. I do Scouting the Fins with Hassan Patel and Eric Wiedeke that broadcast on the 3 Yards Per Carry network as well. So those are the places you can find me for the most part.
Yeah, awesome. Go guys, go check him out with Assam and check out his YouTube. He does great work, and I wanted we've had this in the works. I wanted to get him on, and it went even, as good as I expected, even more. I appreciate so much, guys. I'll be back on Thursday with Jason Sarney. We'll have a special guest, and we'll be going over stuff that's Thursday at 8 p.m. So make sure you catch the on season with Jason Sarney and myself. Thank you guys as always. Stay Fins faithful, Fins up. We are out.